So without further ado, I would like to introduce my guest, Joe Barton.
How you doing?
Thank you for joining me on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
So what did you think about the AIDS walk yesterday?
Oh, I thought it was good. You know, I think that doing it in New York in the park isn't really going to accomplish as much. I would wish they would take it to Albany, where the legislature is and the governor is. You know, I think they would get more done there with the politicians.
Do you think that the politicians would feel that if people were more behind this, that they would get more behind it?
Well, I think if enough people are behind anything, it forces the politicians to deal with it.
Right.
They want votes.
Right. Because Starr was saying that when they went up to Albany and they were talking about all of the different laws and the rules and the regulations, then a lot of the anomalies, the contradictions, that they would sort of listen and then they'd say, hey, do you have any pot? So it seems so so hypocritical.
Yeah, it is.
That politicians are asking for pot, but they're not voting in a direction that's going to be beneficial.
It
for
is.
health.
Look how many politicians have admitted that they smoke marijuana. You know, you got the governor of California. You got even Obama said he smoked pot, but yet we're putting young people in jail for smoking pot. It is very hypocritical.
Right, right. How did you discover it? I mean, how young were you?
Well, I actually smoked my first joint when I was in the Navy in Vietnam.
Really? And what was that like? Because you would think in the Navy, you sort of think that you don't have drugs.
In Vietnam, there were a lot of drugs in Vietnam. Everybody was getting high. Not everybody, but a large percentage of people in Vietnam were getting high.
I remember you told me that story about watching a village. Can you describe that? That was...
Yeah. Well, I was on a ship and we were shelling a village. And when we were shelling the village, it was just like changing channels on television. At one point I was seeing a Vietnamese village with houses blowing up, and then in my mind it just switched over and I was seeing an American housing development with the houses blowing up, and it would switch back and forth. And it made me realize when I was there that you know, we were killing people, not the enemy. You know, it became very human to me. You're blowing up houses. There's women, children. It wasn't just about killing an enemy. You think an enemy is a soldier in uniform.
You know, I used to do a lot of work with Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, and the idea is that if we can relay information versus labels, labels dehumanize people, and after people are dehumanized, then the most atrocious actions can take place.
Right.
But if we can back up and actually exchange information without labels, we'll be less likely to dehumanize the other. And I was going merrily along thinking, isn't this great? I'm going to explain nonviolent communication to the world and we're going to solve all the problems. Then I began to realize that there's actually a financial agenda to sell things, and one of the most lucrative businesses is weapons.
Weapons.
And you can't sell weapons if you don't have wars.
Right.
And you can't have wars if people are looking on each other as one. They need to see each other as the enemy.
Right. And when a country stockpiles enough weapons, in order to keep the factories producing, once they've got too many, you know, when all the shelves are full of shells, they have to have a war to empty those shells so they can make more shells.
Right, right. So the question then is that if you've got all the shelves full of shells,
right,
and the economy's sort of backed up and it needs to, you know, get some action going in order to move forward, how can you, with a revelation like you had, where it was just switching the channels, like instead of seeing a Vietnamese village blowing up, you saw it could be like in the U.S., just...
Yeah, well, I think at this point in time, we have to change the culture to where we produce something that's valuable as opposed to something that's destructive, you know? Instead of replacing weapons all the time. I personally think that entertainment, education is a better way to go than shells.
Right. Now, Louis Kelso, I was looking at a show that Harold Channer did with him in '85. He was talking about the economics of reality. And
right.
he was talking about how if you have capital ownership, it's much more powerful than your labor, particularly because of technology advancing.
Yeah.
But it seems as though it's that the ownership of that capital could also be a monopoly. Henry Georges would talk about it in terms
Right.
of monopoly. Whoever has the ability to charge the rents that the machines are sitting in has the ultimate say in things. But whether it's capital ownership in corporations or whether it's who owns the resources that are needed, as a Georgist would see, it seems as though we need a change of the human heart.
Yep, I agree.
Now, how do you think that's done? I mean, what happened to you that you were able to have, like, the channel changing? You weren't seeing a Vietnamese village, and maybe your fellow soldiers on deck weren't flipping channels. How did your channels flip?
I don't know. I attribute it to a spiritualness. You know, I think for myself, God was waking me up, giving me a different view of the world.
Now, some people have said psychedelics give you a different view of the world and wake you up.
For sure they do.
But then why, you could have on a deck 10 soldiers, or do they call them soldiers, Navy men?
Sailors.
Sailors.
Right.
And they're all on LSD. And some of them are seeing the same old
We
Vietnamese.
weren't doing LSD. I wasn't doing LSD then, and I don't know anybody on my ship that was doing LSD in those days.
Okay.
There was a lot of marijuana.
But that's not psychedelic enough to make that spiritual shift?
Well, you know, a psychedelic is a unique thing. People drowning see their whole life flash before their eyes within a short period of time. That is a psychedelic experience.
Right.
People who've had that near-death experience, your body produces a DMT type of psychedelic trip, where time and space.
Sure, maybe everybody that dies has that, but most people don't come back to that brink to talk about it, to go in the other direction.
Well, psychedelics is a way of having that life-death experience without actually going through the physical changes of dying.
So the hope is that when people see how precious life is, by being at that death's door, they'll backtrack and reevaluate things and say, wow, I better...
Well, it made me do it.
Really?
Yeah.
So that was after Vietnam?
Yeah, I took it. Yeah, LSD I took after Vietnam. I knew when I was in the Navy if I held off on taking LSD. I wanted to, but I knew if I took LSD while I was in the Navy, I wouldn't be able to handle the Navy. I knew it would bring me big trouble.
Really?
Yeah.
Do other sailors, did they take psychedelics and stay in the Navy?
No, I didn't. I was in I was getting out right around 68. We were in Vietnam 67, and that was when it was kind of happening on the West Coast. And I'm from New Jersey, so it wasn't quite happening on the East Coast. And in the Navy, it got, you know, a lot of the sailors in Vietnam started on pot. It was after they got out that they got psychedelicized.
Now, what about the ability to take some expanded experience and actually bring it into manifestation? I think everybody's interested in knowing more about how do we create our reality, and how do we create a reality that really pleases us and delights us, not that we have to take pills to escape from reality. How does that happen?
I'm not sure. I know.
Do you think some people are better at it than others?
Well, I think it's a very individual thing. If you're a person who's comfortable with yourself and you take psychedelics, you don't usually have much problems. But if you're a person who's...
Well, forget problems. Do you have breakthroughs, insights? Does it make life richer and fuller?
Well, it did for me.
Yeah.
And quite a few other people that I've known, and you know, it's been quite a few people who have written books on it, or, you know, that they've had amazing experiences. You know, the best way I can describe it is that we have basically two kinds of consciousness. You have your physical consciousness, where you're aware of the physical world and, you know, day-to-day life.
Right.
And then you have, say, a spiritual consciousness, or your soul consciousness. And most people don't get in touch with that.
They don't even know they have a soul.
Well, yeah.
Maybe they've been told they've had a soul. Maybe they're kind of hoping they have a soul.
Right, but to
they've
actually
never
be in
really
touch with it where it becomes a real thing, you know, a reality, you know. But that can be done through yoga. It can be done through deep religious experience. It's not just psychedelics, but psychedelics for some people, and I won't say for everybody, do bring about that experience. It did in my case, you know.
No, you got passionate about it. I mean, you told me, I just met you, and you told me amazing stories. You know, and here at Farther Down the Rabbit Hole, we're always on the lookout for amazing stories to have, to see if we have, I hope to give my viewers more tools.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking to do.
Well,
that people aren't just entertained, but they're actually given information that they can take into their life, and it will make their life richer and better. But a lot of people are afraid of drugs. I don't take drugs myself, but I'm very fascinated, and I love to connect with people who are fearless, and they like to explore and to think outside the box. It's
right. For me, it was best way I can describe it is there's different ways of focusing consciousness. If you're focusing consciousness on the material world, I got to get up, I got to go to work, I got to this, I got to that. That's one way of focusing on the world. If you focus internally on your spiritualness, right, you perceive things a whole different way. You perceive it from the point of view of what's right, as opposed to what you need. You know, like people need to pay the rent, so they do that. When you focus on your spiritual, the need is a complete different thing. The need is to advance yourself spiritually, to move along the journey, to I don't know. It's very hard to explain.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and this is why I'm saying we like to go into topics more deeply, because the feeling I'm getting is that if you only put your attention on getting up and all of the mundane things, that somehow the clock seems to wind down. You get less enthusiastic, it gets to be more of a grind, and it actually gets harder.
Right.
So you're focusing more on it, but you're less successful at it.
Right.
So if you can expand your awareness, and that's why I'm saying, what are the methods of expanding? We've got a lady here who's doing Yoga Express at M&N.
Yoga,
she knows
so
the
many
mantras.
Ways. That's, you know, I don't believe that there's one path,
right,
you know, or one teaching.
But it does seem as though it's affecting the physiology, that there's physiological changes, and then we'll get back to the plant,
right,
and how our relationship to a plant can be affected. I mean, if there's no one way, still a lot of people wouldn't have taken meditation and yoga seriously unless they had an experience, in which case a drug-induced experience for a lot of people about our age,
right,
in the 60s, it was sort of a kickoff. It was sort of a wake-up call. Some people sort of...
For me it was, for sure.
Yeah, but do you think some people did poorly with it, that they abused it, and that it ruined them? And I mean, why is society so afraid of it?
Well,
why don't I do it?
A lot of people are really afraid to look at themselves on a very deep level.
I know what you're saying, but also Jane Goldberg's a psychoanalyst, and I've worked with her, and I've studied her, Hyman Spotnetz. You could take schizophrenics and cure them without medication, and they'll say, or there's an argument that people take drugs to escape from their feelings, and they don't want to look at themselves. So how can you take something
powerful? Well, that's true with some drugs, you know. Like heroin is definitely an escapist drug. You know,
really?
Heroin's kind of not out, and it's.
So there's nothing redeeming about it?
I won't say there's nothing redeeming about it. It as a medicine, it kills pain. You know, I mean, you know, some things I think are very good for if I was going to have an arm cut off, I definitely would want some kind of opiate.
Right.
You know, because it kills the pain.
So maybe that's why nature put it there. I mean, everything's here for a reason.
Right.
And I think if we can get over the demonization of things, then we'll be more relaxed about the necessity for law enforcement and laws. Well, let's talk about the judicial system and maybe your experiences, however you choose to discuss it. I was very moved when you talked about being 23 years old in a court with your wife, nursing your child, and how passionate you were about.
We had been arrested for marijuana and LSD, and they wanted to put us in jail, but to us it was a religious experience, so we were fighting it on religious grounds. The court was not ready to deal with that. They you know.
You went through 2 or 3 juries, didn't you?
Right, we went through, they threw out 2 juries that were going to let us go, and then the third jury was, not one person on the jury was under 65. At the time I was 23 years old, my wife was I think 20, and
did you have a good lawyer?
No, I was my own attorney.
Even then, your own attorney.
I've been my own attorney. Because,
Wow.
you know, lawyers will not fight a case except the way lawyers do it.
Right.
And if you're trying to fight a case there's 2 ways of doing it. You can get a lawyer and he's going to argue, but he can't argue for your sovereignty. We, according to the Constitution, we're all sovereign human beings.
Did you know this at 23? I mean, that's the buzz lately, this sovereign human being thing.
I did, but not in the terms that I'm using now. I've refined my understanding of how to say it or communicate it.
But you sort of had a gut vibe on that because.
Well, I knew I knew that I was a sovereign human being, and I wanted to speak for myself.
Right.
And I didn't. A lawyer wants to try to defend you, and don't want. I didn't want to go into court and say, "Oh, I never saw those drugs before. They're not mine." You know, when they found them at my house, and lawyers try to do that. Or
so you wanted to be honest.
Yeah, I wanted to. At the time, I had been watching so many people going to jail, friends of mine, young kids going to jail, and I decided I'd had enough, and I really wanted to change it. You know, and
so you were putting a lot of energy into the judicial system. It kind of sounds like your soul was hooked up with that work.
Yeah, well,
you were calling on something, and your wife was behind you.
I believed in what I was doing, and I was trying to communicate that to the court, which is a very hard thing to do.
But you communicated it to talk about the first jury and talk about the prosecutor. That was hilarious.
Well, when the prosecutor outside the court, I had told the prosecutor that. The system that he had was eventually going to collapse and fade away because we were into a new age thing at the time. It's what I was believing, that the old system of hate and war was going to be gone, and that a new system of people people trying to make the world work and share everything.
Just a quick interruption here. Louis Kelsa with binary economics would have had the economic plan to say you were right, but probably the prosecutor and the other people didn't realize that, so you were probably terrifying them.
Yeah.
So
and
go on.
He went so crazy in front of the jury. When I would talk to the jury, I would be telling the jury that, oh, it's my religious belief, and I think that the future is going to be different, and we're going to have a utopian society, you know, and we won't need war anymore. And he went crazy.
And the jury was believing you. They were getting into it. Even though they weren't taking drugs, they were just listening to an experiencer who had taken drugs.
Right. And they were relaxed about it, and they were open-minded to it. But the prosecutor went so crazy for the kill. He was like, if you let these people go, the whole world is going to collapse as you know it, which is kind of what I told him, but he took it to the real extreme. And the jury, when they listened to him, he sounded like a madman, you know?
Just love this story, ladies and gentlemen.
So then the jury was smiling when me or my wife would talk. They'd be relaxed and smiling, and when he talked, they'd be looking at him like, and it was obvious to the judge that he was losing the jury. So then the judge found a reason.
But just a second, the judge should be impartial. He shouldn't care if he's losing the jury.
Judges are not impartial in this country. They're there, even though they say they're supposed to be impartial, they're there to try to uphold the law. They'll even tell the jury, when they got the jury, I'll tell you what the law is and how you got to rule, you know? And that happened to me in a couple of cases, you know, where very few people know jury rights. As a juror, you have a right to vote your conscience. If you think a law is unjust, you don't have to convict. If you stand your ground and say, I'm not going to convict this person, a jury has that right, but they'll never tell jury, the courts will never tell the jury that.
I know until you came and we talked to Christian Lorette, who's a producer of Run from the Cure, I didn't realize that up in Canada, with Rick Simpson's trial, the people on the jury could have overturned the law. And I thought, how can you overturn it just in one case? But apparently it sets a precedent, and then...
But especially in America, with our Constitution, very few people know that people think that the Supreme Court is the highest law of the land. But when the framers of the Constitution set it up, they set it up so the jury is the highest in the land.
So it seems like when you're taking civics in high school, there's a little fly there.
It's on your neck.
Oh, that we should be informed about this. How come we don't know about the juries?
Because our system's so corrupt, it's about the people in
so
power.
So when you say so
want
corrupted,
control.
then education is corrupted. If we don't know that when we sit on a jury, we can vote our conscience, that's like huge thing not to know.
Yeah. It amazes me that they don't teach it in school, but they don't.
So,
a jury, when our founding fathers set up the Constitution, they set it up so that it is in the hand of we the people. We the people have the final say-so in a jury trial. And a jury has a right to vote their conscience. They can judge the facts of a case and the law. If they decide that law is unjust, if they're saying we're going to put some kid who's smoking joints in jail for 10 years, a jury can say, that's too harsh. My conscience doesn't feel good about putting that young person in jail for a couple of joints of marijuana, for destroying that person's life.
Right.
You know,
Right.
It's a nonviolent crime. A jury can say, I'm not going for it. And if they hold out, there's nothing the judge can do but dismiss the case.
It's a big thing to inform people about, and I think that's why on this show, Farther Down the Rabbit Hole, going into the topic more deeply, I wanted to start off talking about the topics of psychedelics and how it affects the consciousness, because I think all the viewers, I know certainly for me, everybody has some prejudice one way or another on that topic. It's a hot topic.
Right.
But what I find very fascinating is whether you're pro-psychedelic or anti-psychedelic, taking it, whether you I'm kind of like slow and easy with yoga and meditation, but I definitely think we have a birthright to expand our awareness, to have more knowledge.
Right.
We should be able to get more knowledge. We can encounter the teachers that we do. Probably we call them into our lives according to the intention and the vibration that we set forward. But I feel that's the greatest gift that every human being is entitled to have, is knowledge. And then this knowledge of psychedelics has affected two things dramatically: our judicial system and our health system with the cancer cures, and then your case with the judicial. So carry on about judicial. I just want to emphasize.
Well, I think
most people don't know these things unless you've been through it. That's my point.
Right. The thing that most people don't understand about psychedelics is the ancient mystics, or the prophets from the Bible, or the people that could predict the future, they stepped into another place in the mind. The mind is very expansive. When you limit yourself just to physical consciousness, you're not in those spaces.
Right. But that scares most people. They want life to be predictable and organized.
Well,
so
I don't think
now when you're talking about ancient times, most people don't have the foggiest idea of what ancient times are, and they don't care. They want to know, how can I pay my rent today? That's why I also said, if you focus only on the mundane, it seems like you get worn out and stressed out, and you become less effective, less enthusiastic,
right,
less wanting to have knowledge, less curious, and more sort of resigning to the same old grind. Whereas if you look into the ancient knowledge, you'll see that there always was a promise and a hope in all the civilizations of a greater knowledge. And it involves law. Law, religion, and philosophy was the same study.
Right.
So there's a law of the body. You can only push it so far before it starts to break down. There's a law of the land. You can only abuse it so far until that starts to break down. The people don't have confidence, and right now people just avoid courts. The common person feels, this is never going to go my way. I'm not rich enough to have justice. I'm not powerful enough, informed enough, educated enough, important enough, and they just avoid it. And
Well,
then you get the plea bargaining.
I would avoid the courts, but they just keep kicking in my door and forcing me in there.
Well, that's like Ronnie Smith. He goes, I'm running for sheriff in Kentucky because I'm tired of running away from him. And then
Right.
when he stood his ground, he realized how much power he had as a citizen or a sovereign being, or what the
Right.
Constitution was about.
Right.
And you go, wow, you start to educate yourself, and then you get with a group of people and start sharing this knowledge, and then we grow together. We're one. We're not
Well, that's
enemies.
what we need now. We, the people of the United States, need to demand change, from the politicians.
Well, did you get change from that? One jury was on your side at 23. The second jury was on your side. Was it the same prosecutor the second time?
Yes, same prosecutor through
Was
the
he
whole
going
thing.
as nuts on the second
Yeah,
jury? They thought he was a
never got off
madman
that.
too.
He never got off that kick of.
But the 65-year-olds liked him.
No, what happened with when they put the 65 jury in, at that point in time, I said to the judge, this is not a jury of our peers. And then
You figured that out yourself. No lawyer told you that.
well, it was obvious.
A jury of peers?
I was
Had you been studying things to come up with that?
not really. It came,
Wow.
it became obvious that
Guess
I did-
psychedelics
that-
work.
that I wasn't going to get a fair trial from these guys, because our generation, the 60s generation, had a certain understanding. The people 60, I was only 23 at the time,
Yeah.
during the whole psychedelic
Were you
era.
good in the high school? Were you a good student in high school?
No, I wasn't a good student in high school. I never really liked school.
And then in college? Did you
No,
go to
I never
college?
went to
You never
college.
went to college. But where'd you even hear the term jury of peers? Because that's kind of part of our constitutional history.
Well,
I mean, a jury of peers means you're not taken into some back room and accused of something you don't even know what it is.
when the police keep kicking in your door, after a while you start educating yourself.
Okay.
What is the law? What are my rights?
Did you hang with lawyers and ask them to kind of smarten yourself up?
No, because you know what?
Sometimes they prejudice you and
Lawyers-
limit you, and
Lawyers all belong to the Bar Association, which is like a club. Now, the
Right.
Bar Association has rules, and the lawyers have to go along with those rules. Now, because they're stuck with these certain rules, they can't assert sovereignty. Only we, the people, you as an individual, me as an individual, and people out there in the world, they can assert their sovereignty. But a lawyer can only handle you like you were a corporation, like he's defending a corporation.
I don't mind being a corporation as long as I get corporate credit. But that's another topic.
No, but not in the criminal system. You don't want to be a corporation, because a corporation actually has no rights. We, the people, as sovereigns, have rights. The Constitution applies to us.
So in certain places, it's better to be in a criminal versus a civil court if you want to exercise the
No,
sovereignty?
I'm not saying it's better to be in a criminal court, but if you're in a criminal court, and it's better to assert your sovereignty
Right.
than let a lawyer treat you like you're a corporation.
Which would be in a civil court.
No, in a criminal court.
In a criminal court, how can they treat you as a corporation?
It's very complicated.
Well, I'm definitely going to study up more on this
Yeah.
because I'm very interested in corporate financing, and I think people have to get their heads
Okay,
around how they view themselves and what
let's-
they're entitled to.
Many years back, America went bankrupt.
I heard George
Right.
Washington was the 7th president.
No, I'm talking. I think it actually went. The first time it really went bankrupt was after the Civil War.
No,
Right.
I heard right from the get-go, right after the Revolutionary War, the common person was very poor.
Yeah, but
It's actually been a nightmare. Harold Channer's right. History is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awaken.
Right.
Even the history that we learn has been sanitized. And
Right.
then we wonder why we're not operating with the full deck
okay.
to be
Let
successful.
me make the point I was trying
Yeah.
to make. After the Civil War, the country went bankrupt. So what they had to do was, originally we were the United States right? Then they had to incorporate the United States because there was no money. So in order to get money from the World Bank, they had to incorporate the United States. Once they incorporated it, there's really two United States. There's United States Incorporated and the United States of we the people, right? But when they incorporated it, the incorporation part of the United States started taking more and more control, till after a while they see that corporation sees us as chattel. That corporation owns us, and to the World Bank, we're worth a certain amount of money, our labor and our resources from this country is what's backing the national debt.
I've heard this.
So what we really are to the corporation is we're slaves.
Okay, so
if you assert your sovereignty, you no longer become a slave.
Okay, so how did it work at 23? How has your history been?
I didn't know. I didn't know what I know now then.
Okay.
You know.
But it still seems like you were operating on your gut level and
right on my gut level. On my gut level, I did know it to a certain. I knew that they taught me in school that we the people are sovereigns and we have rights.
I know, but see, the nature of corruption is it doesn't matter.
Right. I found that out.
A judge will throw a trial, or that's the point.
He's always going to go with the power system. Yes.
So if that's the reality, let's be really practical. That's why I'm saying I like how you've had these expanded experiences, but you're also very focused. When other people, I think, who were as fond of getting high as you were, would kind of be in a mess. To stay focused. So.
Well, I was forced to it because they were always. I mean, I was dealing marijuana, and I've been growing marijuana for a lot of years. So they're always kicking in my door, coming and trying to put me away. They've locked me up a few times. Right now I'm facing I was growing marijuana and giving a lot of it to medical patients. I was using a lot myself, and I was sharing it with friends because for me it's also a religious experience.
Right.
That to me is the most important part of it.
When you say religious experience, you mean you cultivate a state of awareness where you feel expanded and optimally
expanded consciousness, right.
And so you can function as best as possible.
Beyond the physical consciousness.
And that you can serve.
The same as the yogis do, or the the mystics.
And serving others. Don't you think that's oftentimes missed in the equation, the serving others, taking in care, because you were helping somebody that had
anyone who's gotten to that expanded consciousness, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, when
they start healing, don't they?
Yeah.
You see the healings happening.
Right. And you care more about society. It's not me first, and it's not the greedy thing, it's fix the world. Like I was saying to you earlier, right now we live in a society that from the time I was a little kid and first started watching television, I saw pictures of black babies in Africa with swollen bellies because they had no food. When I see today, it's the same thing. We live in a world that's got so much. We should not be seeing babies on television with swollen bellies, The starvation in the world, that's because of greed. It's because of that lower consciousness. Oh, I got to get me first and get all I can. We really do need to move towards a utopian society, a society that takes care of everybody.
Where does that motivation come from? Where would that decision come from?
I think
it's just one person.
Jesus did it. Mahatma Gandhi did it. Martin Luther King.
Did you do it when that guy had the cancer on his neck, and you gave him oil?
Yes.
Because I asked you about your experience with oil, and you said you weren't taking that much yourself because you were saving it for really sick people.
Right.
And then his tumor went down, and then you
Sam, he had a tumor on his neck. It was so big, and he couldn't talk. He heard no vocals. I had watched the Rick Simpson thing. I also had heard back in 1974, the United States was trying to prove that marijuana caused cancer, and they hired Virginia College to do research. And then the research came back that said marijuana cured, THC cures cancer.
Right.
I had heard that back in '74, so that was in my mind. And then Rick Simpson came along, and I saw the Rick Simpson video, and I found out that he was curing all kinds of people with the oil extracted from marijuana.
High concentrations of
right,
THC.
high concentrations of THC. And then Sam came along, and he's another Vietnam veteran, and he had cancer, and the doctors told him that they had to cut him from ear to ear and take it out, and they didn't know for sure if they were going to be able to get rid of it, and he would lose his voice, and he didn't want to go for chemotherapy and all that stuff, so it was getting really bad, and he was losing his voice. When I first met Sam, almost no sound came out when he talked, right? And then I started making hash oil or THC oil for Sam. I said, well, let's see if this really works, you know? And I started, and we made the oil for Sam, and Sam was taking it, and the tumor went way down on his neck.
How many weeks was he taking it?
I think he was, for about a month he was taking it.
And you gave him the oil?
Yeah, I gave him the oil.
And the oil was made from a pound?
Yeah, from a pound of marijuana.
So you essentially gave him $2,000 at least, or $7,500 if you're in New York City.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. But
that was very generous.
Well,
wasn't it? I mean, I know a lady now who was kind of like, she had a guy like you in her.
Spiritual level, you have to, healing is what it's about. Healing society, healing people.
I know, and the suffering's that intense.
Right, right. You know, I mean, if you look at any of the great spiritual teachers, that's the message that runs through them all.
Right.
The yogis are teaching people how to heal themselves or how to get to the next level for health reasons or for spiritual reasons, for emotional reasons, you know.
The oil now is very rare because my feeling is I had people contacting me who needed it. I even had some growers contacting me who would provide it. But I didn't have any money to buy it. I didn't want to become, you know, on Facebook say, here's where you're going to get your oil.
Yeah.
And it seemed, from what I could pick up, this is just my observation as an outsider, that the oil is so precious and it does so many things that a grower would rather keep it to himself and help himself and his family than even deal with the risk of getting out in the world where it's so illegal.
I can tell you what I saw, my own experience. I know what Rick Simpson did, and I saw the videos, and I saw all the testimonies.
Rick healed everybody in town.
Right,
He had
I saw all the
1,600
testimonies.
plants.
Okay, but from my own experience, when we gave it to Sam, I watched the giant tumor that was in his neck go down to about half. When he could barely whisper, he had now had sound back in his voice. You could understand him, right? And then the police kicked in my door and took the oil, and we didn't give any more to Sam. And because Sam stopped taking the oil, he regressed, and eventually Sam died. And I really believe that we could have saved Sam's life had the police not kicked in my door, you know? The court system does not want to face it, and part of the reason they don't want to face it, the reality that THC oil cures cancer, is because economics. The big corporations, chemotherapy is making a lot of money for the hospitals. All the pills that they got to give a chemo
But you
patient.
know, right now Time Warner is making a lot of money with cable, and we as producers aren't getting any money.
Right.
So I keep thinking, is there something wrong with the equation here? I keep struggling with this. Like, I know a lady now in Indiana who made a commercial, and someone sent her some oil, and she had a brain tumor, and the brain tumor goes down, and she's happy. And then the oil stops. And the guy, you know, they can't keep giving it away for free. But at the same time, isn't this what the greed, like usually people with cancer, a lot of times they have a lot of psychological issues running in their life. And because of these other issues, manifestation's not so easy for them, money's tight for them. And then they come up and the stress makes the body a fertile place for the fungus. Some people believe, I believe cancer's a fungus, but whatever, even if you don't believe that, there is a cancer profile. And these people need help It's not just the Illuminati and the big brothers and the pharmaceuticals. It also boils down to a community now who has this knowledge. How do they operate within themselves to include everyone when people are sick? Because there's this tendency we all have, the government will take care of you. Someone else will take care of you. Insurance will take care of you. I had a friend of mine, he was a hairdresser, and he was paying $1,000 a month for his premiums. He didn't have 1 penny left to do some therapies that would have helped him.
We have to change society. Right now we have a society that profits on sickness and disease and death. They profit from it. We need to take that out of the equation.
I even have people come to me and they're excited about the cancer cure, and I can feel their brains going, how can I make money off this? See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because you think if something's so great that even take the high price of pot, $7,500. What's that compared to a round, 5 rounds at Sloan Kettering at $120,000,
right,
which is essentially rat poison.
Right.
That's what it is. It's really cheap. And
right,
you know, again, I'm going out to all these households and they'll say, who is this crazy public access producer? What does she know? And I'm saying the best thing I can do for my viewers is whet your appetite to go out and study yourself.
Right.
Go out, do some of the research yourself and see what you come up with. And it's astonishing. So the evidence of your...
Go on the website and see Run for the Cure.
Full version. If you see Run from the
Full
Cure...
version.
Full
Run
version.
for the Cure, Rick Simpson. And
Yeah.
you'll see real testimonies of people who've been cured. Now, right now we have a big industry on medicine and pharmaceuticals and chemotherapy. The government doesn't want the people to be able to grow in their own backyard marijuana, be able to produce the oil themselves and cure themselves. The American people have to demand this.
I don't know.
There is a cure and we should have it.
I don't know if it's the government. I don't know what it is. And I'm trying to find out that place where you can hit the spot and you can make the change. And I'm suspecting it's within. That if we are God within, we're no longer victims. And that in order to exercise our sovereignty, we'll do it in different ways. Like Rick has the hemp oil. He has the proof on the people's
but Rick's
bodies.
a fugitive right now.
He's doing pretty well in Czechoslovakia. 10,000 people
Right,
showed up.
but
The
if he
country
came
of
to Canada,
Czechoslovakia.
they'd lock him in jail.
I've heard
he had to
different-
leave Canada.
I've heard different things on that. I think, I don't want to be a Pollyanna about it, but I do think if you move forward with evidence that you're on solid ground and it's there. So I'm saying, okay, Rick's got the example of the human bodies. He has lots of experience, hundreds and hundreds of people. The courageous ones went in front of the camera. Christian Lorette, the producer of Run from the Cure, got their evidence. Now, how about our body, our judicial body? That's where you're working now. Talk to us about changing things on that level.
I'm really up against it. I'm fighting them in court, trying to get the change, but more than likely they're going to crucify me like they crucify anybody that tells the truth. You know, I'm fighting the case.
Talk about how you decided your decisions.
About my decision?
In court.
Well, I had no choice. You know,
You could do what Carl said, plea bargain.
No, but that would be, if I plea bargain, we don't get change.
I understand.
So sooner or later, somebody has to stand up and tell the courts the truth, even when they don't want to hear it.
Right.
You know?
The courts may not want to hear it, but what I'm trying to do with my little show here, and I want to go to Union Square and sit with a little booth, is to inform people what's happening in the courts. Because everybody out there has to know somebody with cancer.
Yeah.
So this is a concern of everyone's.
Yeah.
So your court case, when you say if you plea bargain, nothing would change, that really resonates with me. Nothing would change.
Right,
if
but
you
that's
plea
like
bargain.
admitting, okay, I was doing something wrong.
Yeah, what does that send up to your soul?
Right. No, I can't do that. I can't do that.
But I bet you Carl is thinking, oh my God, here's another, you know,
Carl,
high hippie.
Carl told me I'm
thinks-
going to go to jail. You know, he said, he kept saying, take the plea, try to plea it down to the least charge so you do the least. But, you know, that
And
would,
then they get off the hook not to change anything, huh?
I might
everybody goes along
I might
with
be
it.
willing to do that if it was just me. But we're talking about millions of people. How many little children have had arms or limbs removed because of cancer?
Or
When
even,
there is
even,
a cure
even,
for it.
even diabetes, the diabetic infections,
Right.
that they
Well,
have
I don't know as
amputations
much
for
about that, but I've
But you
heard,
saw cancer yourself, I understand.
right. And I know Rick cured a lot of different things, you know, and I've seen the testimony of the people who said, yes, the doctors told me I'm going to die. Rick Simpson gave me this oil, and I'm healthy now. And I had my x-rays, and they're clean. So I mean, I know it works. Now it's time for the American people to demand the politicians to change, the courts to change. Right now, we're putting young kids in jail for marijuana, and it costs you, the taxpayer, $40,000 to $60,000 to put this kid in jail for a year. You could send him to college for that for 4 years. It's crazy. It's crazy. The laws have to change.
Can you run through your trial court situation? It's a very interesting points that you're bringing up. Your motions.
I've made motions, all kinds of motions, and the court, even when I'm making a valid point, the prosecutor ignores it. For 14 months this case went on, and the prosecutor refused to answer any of my motions because he don't want to hear the truth.
Okay, let's go through the motions. They're interesting.
Well, I was saying, I've been saying marijuana cures cancer. All right, when the legislature in New York made the law that made marijuana illegal, first they made it under the Rockefeller law, right? And it was very, very harsh, much more harsh even than it is today. Then the legislature...
What year was that?
I'm not sure of the year of that.
Okay.
Then the legislature in 1977 was pushing to lighten the marijuana laws.
Decriminalize it.
Right, to lighten it. And they called it, they were going to decriminalize marijuana, which made it sound like nobody would go to jail for marijuana, but that's not true. They made it so 25 grams of marijuana, which is a small amount, and you just pay a fine. But beyond 25 grams, it's criminal penalties, and you can do jail time. Now, but when they were doing that, when they were trying to change from Rockefeller drug laws to the decriminalized laws, they did research. They checked with scientific evidence, and Nixon, they read the Nixon thing, what was it, the Schaefer Commission that Nixon appointed, and on Schaefer Commission said marijuana's harmless, you know, and 2 or 3 others. Canada did one.
It's more than harmless. It would be anti-tumoral. It'd be beneficial. It'd be medicine.
Well, they didn't know that then.
And Nixon by 74?
No, the government knew it, and they buried the research.
Well, you keep saying the government's, whoever's running the studies and controlling the studies, I just can't believe.
It's the DEA. The DEA is profiting from all this.
Did the DEA fund the studies at the University of Virginia?
Yeah. They wanted to try to show that marijuana was harmful, and they wanted to say they wanted the results to come up. Marijuana causes cancer.
I see.
But the results came up in Virginia study that it cures cancer. So the first thing the government did was take that research and bury it. Dr. Guzman in Spain got a copy of that and redid that and took it even further. And he says marijuana cures cancer.
Now, if he actually doesn't say that. In an email I got from him, he says we're a long way from cure. But I often wonder, are we a long way from cure because our heads aren't in the right place to accept the evidence? I was saying to Jane Goldberg, I said, what's the resistance in the country? Because that's a psychoanalytical term, when somebody has resistance.
Right.
And it's ultimately you want to not be resisting to connecting with your full spiritual and psychic powers and abilities. That's...
Well, the government has been the one putting out the propaganda, and they've conditioned America to believe drugs are bad, unless you get them from the pharmacist and from the doctor,
And remember,
which all the commercials say it might cure your headache, but it's going to kill your liver.
yeah,
You know.
the disclaimers.
Right, right. And when you listen to that, I don't know. There's been 5,000 years of recorded history of marijuana. There's never been a recorded death on marijuana.
I know.
There's been deaths on aspirin, and you can buy aspirin over the counter.
Right. So your motion had to do with this 77 decriminalizing precedent?
Right. When they were going to decriminalize it, they did the research, and in their own documents, in the legislature's own documents, Abigail Storm found them in their archives, and in their own documents it said, scientific evidence clearly shows no significant harm or no harm at all from marijuana use. Now, if the legislature knew scientific evidence shows no harm, no significant harm, or no harm at all, how can they make criminal penalties? That's what I'm fighting my case on. I'm saying, look, if the legislature says that the law, that marijuana does no harm, how can you make a law to make it a criminal penalties?
But now what Carl said to that is, who cares how the law got here? That's what the law is, and we as the jurors have to vote that you broke the law, that you have to change the law somewhere else. But he's also told me in other conversations that you need to start a political movement to change the laws.
But you can't change the law somewhere else if the legislature who made the law is being funded by the pharmaceutical companies and by the chemotherapy people.
No, I understand that, but what law did you break then?
As far as I'm concerned, I broke no law.
So there isn't a law that says you can't have marijuana or give oil to people.
Well, I mean, our government has made laws. The state of New York has laws on the books that say marijuana is illegal. If you have a certain amount, you get fined. If you have more than that amount, you go to jail.
So this medical marijuana bill that Abigail Storm says isn't such a great thing, isn't going to take this 25 grams and show the contradiction that you can't both say there's no danger to it and even benefit if you're looking at those studies that were buried.
Right.
And say that more than this amount all of a sudden magically becomes criminal. What is the crime?
Right. Right.
Who's being? Where's the victim?
That's what I'm saying in court.
Where's the victim?
Right. Where's the victim? That's what I'm saying in my papers.
Okay, so that motion.
But all they keep saying back to me is, it's the law. Yeah, but if a law is unjust, the law needs to be changed.
But they're always saying you can't do that in court. Until I heard voting with your conscience, if you're on the jury.
Right, juries can change it.
I think if the jury changes it, if there is something, you have to have a populace that's very well informed that this is happening, and have the back supported, so to speak, that it's being watched.
Right, we the people of America really do rule this country, but unfortunately, most of the people are asleep.
Right.
And they're not acting as sovereigns and asserting their sovereignty.
You know what struck me also in Rick Simpson's trial up in Canada, there were times when he kind of got in the groove like you do, you know, you just sort of feel like you're linked up with your soul.
Right.
And he said, you're the ones who are going to be going to jail if the people find out that you're not upholding the health of the population.
Well, if the legislature is holding back a cure from cancer because they're profiting from it, then the legislature is criminal.
How does the legislature profit from it? A pharmaceutical would. They profit from it because they're being funded by the pharmaceuticals for their campaigns?
In order to become a senator or a congressman, you need a lot of money. Now, some of the biggest contributors to their campaigns are the pharmaceutical companies. And the pharmaceutical companies they don't want a cure that people can grow in their backyard enough marijuana and be able to produce the hash oil themselves because it's a very easy process and cure themselves of cancer because billions of dollars are at stake. But how can you put money against health?
Okay, so Joe, since you've seen so many different worlds, how are growers today, successful growers, how do they feel about it? If any old Joe, if I can put a pot plant in my planter box and grow enough for me to make oil in my own little apartment, how would somebody who's making huge profits on it feel about this? How are the successful growers dealing with this? I heard in California they don't want it legalized, some of them, because they see monopolies are coming in, Monsantos
I'm
are coming
against
in,
that. Well,
and they want to have the seeds owned. And
no, I think it should be, everyone should be allowed to grow however much they want. You know, if the big corporations want to produce it, I don't have a problem with that. If farmers want to produce it, I don't have a problem with that.
Rick Simpson wanted pharmaceutical grade, good quality.
Yeah. Oh, I think it would be much better.
To organize the strains so you know how much CBD, how much THC.
Right.
This better for epilepsy, this better for heart conditions.
And you got cannabis sativa and cannabis indica. Indica is more if you want a patient to sleep and to rest and to recuperate, indica is a much better one. If you want to have a patient up and be active, a sativa is more that kind of effect. Mm-hmm. The highs are different, you know.
I guess a chemist would know the difference. Raphael Michelin would maybe know.
Or anyone who really smokes a lot.
Well, yeah, but I mean there must be, the strains must have different components in them. So instead of saying 25 different products, or I think there's 70 different chemical aspects in the cannabis plant.
Right.
So instead of having 70 different brands, which I think pharmaceuticals like the idea, all of our research, ladies and gentlemen, can only be funded if there's a patentable product at the end of that research. That means that any research that goes in the direction anywhere other than a patentable product, which might be the best direction for optimal health, will never be supported. It will never see the light of day, and the courts will not be informed by peer-reviewed journals who will block those studies out.
Right.
Because Carl talked about standing. They could say in the court that these Rick Simpson tales are anecdotal and they have no standing. Meanwhile, Christian Lorette, they went to the Canadian Cancer Society, to the UN, they beat on the doors of everyone. They don't want the cure.
Right,
they would wish you well.
They don't want the cure.
But what's your well-wishing worth unless people look at the economic plan?
No, the American people have to wake up and demand the cure, you know. I'm fighting it in court, but I'm probably going to lose unless a lot of people get behind me. I would like to see hundreds of, if hundreds of people could show up at my court case and observe to the point where they let me speak and they let me make my points, I might get a fair trial. But as long as there's no one watching, they're going to shut me down and they're not going to let the truth come out. I chose to fight this case to try to change the law, to try to save lives. I need the support of people. If the case is going to happen in June 28th in Kingston, New York, I would ask hundreds, if we could get 1,000 people there, they would let me speak and they would let me present the evidence. And I have the evidence that I can prove that the marijuana